Okay, I think we're sliced into the mainframe and ready to go. This is State of Play with Mint Press News, a live stream geopolitical editorial news show hosted by yours truly. We're going to examine and break down foreign policy events and really hone in on the absurdity of the modern condition. And tragically, we're not going to run out of any material anytime soon. So, my name is Greg Stoker. I'm a former U.S. Army Ranger turned analyst and commentator. And as a disclaimer, I'll repeat, this show is editorial, i.e., not entirely objective, because after 4 combat deployments, fighting a pointless forever war in Afghanistan, I now have a somewhat critical view of empire, just a little bit. Because, some of the same movers and shakers and politicians and special interests who determined U.S. foreign policy during the unfortunately dubbed global war on terror are now the same players that are shaping foreign policy now. So before we get into the various facets of this impending Israel-Hezbollah conflagration that could very well plunge the entire region into a wider war, we have to, as this is episode 1, knock out some quick administrative announcements. Yay. Okay, so first, Mint Press is an independent newsroom and doesn't have any corporate sponsors. Mint Press has been banned from PayPal. Fundraisers have been taken down by GoFundMe and demonetized on YouTube. If you'd like to support this brand of independent journalism, consider dropping your Economist subscription and slanging $5 a month this way on Patreon. It does go a long way to support independent watchdog journalism. So if not, I get it. We are, after all, getting nickeled and dimed to death in contemporary society. We're just glad you're here. But something to think about in the future. The second, State of Play, that's the name of the show, and we'll get into why it's called that later if we have time. We'll be airing Mondays and Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Apologies to those not on the American continent, but if you're a night owl, it won't be a problem. And if you're not, you can always watch the replays later. So we chose Mondays and Fridays because we've noticed a trend. All the controversial foreign policy decisions and atrocities have been happening over the weekend. So Monday will be more of a weekend roll-up episode with analysis, and on Fridays, we will endeavor to be more predictive of whatever madness will transpire over the weekend. One episode a week will feature a live Q&A section at the end. So the last 10 minutes of this episode, after we get into the Israel-Hezbollah shenanigans, we're going to have a 10-minute chunk where I'm going to have time to answer some Q&A questions that producer Jim, will figure out and curate. So, and then the other episode is going to be generally a guest episode. So isn't that exciting? So over the next few weeks, we're going to refine it. We'll work out some rough spots. This is my first time ever hosting a live show. So what could possibly go wrong? All right, keep watching to find out. Anyways, let's get started. So I said on social media in November that Israel is prosecuting a ground assault against Hezbollah into southern Lebanon. And that idea is absolutely insane, which is why I thought it most likely wouldn't happen, or that the Biden administration, desiring self-preservation and to curtail the possibility of a wider regional war, would enforce political and military breaks on Netanyahu's government. Well, apparently there are no red lines when it comes to Israeli military operations, and the IDF and political leadership seem hell-bent on charge of the light brigading themselves into a death trap that is southern Lebanon. We'll get into why that is in a second. That's a very obscure Alfred Tennyson poetry reference. So Hezbollah has stated that they will keep firing rockets and applying military pressure in northern Israel until a ceasefire is called in Gaza. And Netanyahu has stated that he would only accept a partial ceasefire deal that would not end the war, but would transition to a new phase of low-intensity fighting in Gaza, which would, in theory, allow a shift in focus to a northern campaign. This is, therefore, an intractable situation. Israel, and I'm speaking now of it as a governmental entity, feels compelled to restore its deterrence capacity. Again, we'll get into that, which was destroyed on October 7th. I mean, they can't defeat Hamas, and they can't let Hezbollah get away with hitting military sites with impunity, so they feel compelled to attack, even if it will be disastrous. So there is something incredibly resigned and fatalistic about the decision to greenlight this offensive, but they can't really back down now. So let's start by examining why this course is fatalistic, as there is a great historical precedent to predict what is to come by looking at the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war. The reasons for the outbreak in hostilities aren't as important as we are only looking at the performative effect. Who won? Who lost? What was the cost? What were the tactics, techniques, and procedures employed? And we'll begin by watching some clips from a 9-year-old I-24 news documentary. I-24 is an Israeli outlet. And then juxtapose some of its conclusions with a white paper by a U.S. Army War College on the 2006 war. So that's going to take about 5 minutes or so, and then we get to compare and contrast and then make predictions. Isn't this fun? All right, so this is from a documentary from 9 years ago about the Israel-Hezbollah war. And I'm going to make commentary and pause it throughout because there's a lot that needs correcting in here. Here we go.
Of Beirut.
The world supported the war. Israel had enormous legitimacy from the world to attack Lebanon, to attack Hezbollah, for two reasons. A, it was obvious that Israel suffered from years because of Hezbollah's attacking, and enough was enough. The world gave Israel a chance to fight Hezbollah.
So what he's talking about is generally what people consider to be Israel's window of legitimacy. Every time they start a campaign, there's this political terminology that's used. It's called the window of legitimacy. If you look at, actually, I brought up The Economist. If you look at articles from November in The Economist, December, they did this entire piece called Israel Alone. You'll see that they referred to this concept of a window of legitimacy. And they said in January it was running out. Well, we're like half a year later, and the window of legitimacy where they can, in good faith and without having any political backlash, conduct combat operations, it's running out. And the reason I've only heard of, you may have only heard of the window of legitimacy thing when it comes to Israel, is because they generally use a lot of violence and it makes people uncomfortable. So that's kind of what he's referring to here.
For 5 weeks, killing 1,500 and more Lebanese civilians, because the world said to itself, we must let Israel get the bad ones out of the way in order to keep on going on the path to peace. That was the thinking.
In response, Hezbollah increases the range of its Katyusha rockets at targets it has never attacked before, such as Haifa, Tiberias, Afula, and Hadera. Some 1 million Israelis are within missile range. The Second Lebanon War turns the Israeli home front into the front line. 3,969 Katyusha rockets fired into Israel caused tremendous damage to property and lives. 44 civilians are killed and tens of thousands of acres of forest are set alight. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are forced to crowd into badly maintained bomb shelters, revealing the disturbing lack of preparedness of the home front.
We feel pressure, we feel fear, especially when you have little children and you have to take care of them.
This feeling is not very pleasant, going back again and again to the shelter.
Thousands of people from the north flee the missile threat and move into a tent city in the south of Israel.
So I just wanted to bring up this situation because we're seeing a lot of the same things play out right now, right? There's 60,000 people in the north, Israeli citizens in the north, that have been displaced due to rocket attacks. They're having to be housed in the government has told hotels that are housing them that they need to be prepared to continue to house them for at least until the end of the year. So they don't expect this. They're preparing for this not to be resolved anytime soon. And I just wanted to make out one point. The Katyusha rockets that Hezbollah fired in 2006, they fired an entirety of 3,000, like 3,600. Well, we're going to get into think tank reports from Israeli think tanks that say that Hezbollah can shoot that many rockets now. They have the operational capacity to shoot up to 3,000 rockets a day, and they have an entire cache of 150,000 to 200,000, some of which are precision. So, the civilian cost for people living inside Israel is going to be insane. And then we'll look at what happened to Beirut during this conflict, because they've said the exact same thing is going to happen. So it's good to be aware of this.
Donated by Jewish oligarch Arkady Gaidamak.
With joy and happiness, we drive away the evil.
But not only the north of Israel is ablaze. During the first stages of the operation, most of the IDF's targets are hit by massive Air Force bombardments and artillery fire that cause tremendous damage to infrastructure, command posts, military bases, and manpower. On July 13th, the IDF places a complete sea and air embargo on Lebanon, and IAF fighter planes attack Beirut's international airport, forcing it to close. Some 300 Lebanese and 600 Hezbollah fighters are killed.
We don't trust IDF numbers, but just keep the airport thing in mind. You may have read the news that, well, the airport's definitely getting hit again.
In Beirut, the Dakhia neighborhood, a Hezbollah stronghold, is transformed into a sea of ruins and becomes, in the eyes of the Lebanese people, a symbol of Israeli aggression. On July 14th, just 2 days after the start of the war, Hezbollah fires an Iraqi-made rocket on an Israeli ship.
Okay, yeah, I think most people have heard about the Israeli ship, but I wanted to bring up and play that clip because for those just coming into this and coming into the history, Dakhia was a neighborhood in Beirut that housed a lot of apparently the Hezbollah command and control structures, and they just bombed it indiscriminately. And so it became part of Israeli military tradition and doctrine. Doctrine is like, you know what? I know all the fancy words, but I don't know definitions. So 1 second. Okay, doctrine. A belief or set of beliefs held and taught by a group, a standard principle of policy, mainly foreign or military affairs. So basically all of their operational planning is rooted in a certain set of doctrines they have, like the Hannibal Directive, the Dakhia Doctrine. So the Dakhia Doctrine basically states that when fighting a conflict, one of their main go-to strategies is to collectively put pressure on the civilian population by targeting infrastructure in order to pressure the associated militant group into surrender or capitulation or diplomatic concessions. So the entire Dakhia Doctrine, which we're seeing played out in Gaza, not just through a sustained bombing campaign of civilian infrastructure, but also through weaponized starvation and, controlled hunger and stuff like that. It's all meant to collectively punish civilians, to pressure them, and by extension, the militants associated with them. But it didn't work in 2006. It didn't work in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge. It didn't work now. It hasn't worked. It hasn't pressured Hamas at all. So that's just something that we can expect. We do expect if this front opens up for Israel to intentionally target civilian infrastructure, because they've said it. Benjamin Netanyahu said in January, if Hezbollah opens up a second front, a full-scale shooting war, they will, quote, turn Beirut into Gaza. So just setting the stage for that, just for the baseline for the rest of this conversation. Remember, the Dakhia Doctrine is going to be front and center of how they plan their operations. So I'm going to take one more 2-minute clip from that same documentary where they say like the Israeli soldiers comported themselves brilliantly, and then we're going to contrast it with some official U.S. Army literature about the 2006 war. It's different.
Sources, both technological and human sources, when the same soldiers who, after 6 years, and commanders were used to get such an advanced intelligence upon going to each house, preventing many lives and having luxury intelligence, when they went into Lebanon, knowing nothing, it held them back.
Okay, so this is an interesting point because Palestine, like territories like the West Bank and Gaza, are some of the most surveilled. They're the most surveilled places on earth because Israel's a leading purveyor of spyware and tester of spyware and espionage technology. That they had a completely different intelligence architecture and capabilities than they have over their own oppressed population than they have over targets and Hezbollah. So in southern Lebanon, because they're outside of their sphere of occupation and control. And so they weren't used to fighting with such sparse intelligence on like where the enemy was, what their capabilities were, who the leadership was, and it was a big mess. So that's something they will have to figure out how to deal with. They won't figure it out, but they'll have to try.
Despite the criticism leveled against senior officers, during the ground offensive, the fighting ability of the troops stands out, and especially that of IDF officers and soldiers who found themselves in fierce battles, evacuating wounded while under fire and in enemy territory.
Just remember that statement. We're going to get to it in a second.
And this is the picture that symbolizes, perhaps more than any other, the determination of the IDF soldiers. Tomer Boadana, a paratroop officer who was severely wounded in the fighting, shows the world his feelings, even as he's being evacuated from the field. But the international support given to Israel at the start of the operation begins to fall apart. The day after the start of the ground offensive, the UN Security Council approves Resolution 1701, calling for an end to the fighting. But despite this, the IDF continues to fight, deepening its hold on southern Lebanon, in an operation that remains controversial until today.
It was necessary for us to go there. I know there's a lot of criticism regarding that. It wasn't a spin, as someone said. It was a tool that the Prime Minister had to take. The entire government supported it. The army recommended it. And that was the right thing to do.
The ground offensive came to a halt 48 hours later, but cost the lives of 33 IDF soldiers and 60 wounded.
I miss you.
The ceasefire is coming into force. Stop shooting. We hope that the ceasefire will hold. We remind you we are still on alert.
Okay, well, we can skip the rest of that. We all know that the ceasefire eventually went into effect, obviously. So what happened in the aftermath is generally considered that the IDF incursion into southern Lebanon was a strategic defeat. A lot of literature was written on it, especially by the United States military. Anytime the U.S. military fails in an operation, or one of the allies fails or does something that, think you can learn about, there's something called a white paper. And then based off that, there's a lot of other ancillary literature talking about it, a lot of operational autopsies and stuff. So we're going to pull up one of those, because the same issues that existed for the IDF exist now. By comparing what happened and how their military and what mistakes that were made in 2006 with the same weaknesses that exist now, looking at Gaza, they literally haven't changed. So what happened in the aftermath was a lot of retroactive propaganda went into creating an image of defeat for Hezbollah and an image of victory for the Israeli military. And actually, when I was in the army, this is the first time I kind of came into contact with any literature that was like, yeah, the Israeli military, kind of a conscript army. They weren't prepared to fight a real war. And that's kind of, for me, when a lot of the propaganda that I grew up with as a white dude in Texas, around like evangelicals, I was never that, but, started to become deconstructed. So we're going to pull up that real quick. So if you kind of want to reference this and look at it sometime later, this is a paper. It's one of the ancillary offshoot pieces of literature that was written about the 2006 Lebanon War. So it's written by the U.S. Army Combined Arms Center of Combat Studies. It's out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and it's a war college. So it's where they, play war games, figure out what's going to work best, and try to prepare for operations and a whole mess of stuff. But anyways, I just wanted to highlight just a couple of assertions that is the official position of the United States military. And I wanted to have literature to back it up. So we're going to go to the beginning of this. Despite Israel assuring the United States of a quick and decisive resolution to the conflict, Hezbollah's short-range Katyusha rockets continue to rain down on the Israeli population. As days went by, it became increasingly apparent to both the Israeli Defense Forces and the Western military analysts that the IAF, Israeli Air Force, was having little effect on Hezbollah's rockets. Both their air defense artillery systems, both doing fighter intercepts to try to take down the rockets. And also the IDF was having very little success in destroying Hezbollah's command infrastructure and warfighting capabilities by just carpet bombing everything. It's almost like looking at Gaza, carpet bombing everything doesn't work. So when the IDF reluctantly moved its ground forces into southern Lebanon, the apparent ineffectiveness of the operation and the stubborn resistance of Hezbollah fighters stunned military observers worldwide. After years of highly successful counterinsurgency operations, or COIN operations, which we can talk about later, against the Palestinians, the IDF appeared remarkably inept to conduct a successful conventional war. Okay, so without question, the Israeli ground campaign revealed an army confused by its new doctrine. Soldiers were deficient in training and equipment, and senior officers seemed woefully unprepared to, quote, fight a real war. By the time the United Nations ceasefire went into effect on August 14th, 2006, many military analysts were convinced the IDF had suffered a significant defeat. One source held that Hezbollah's military suffered a significant defeat. And political victory was absolute and irrefutable. Hezbollah's political victory was absolute and irrefutable. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing happen in Gaza. Even more revealing were the comments by Mossad chief Meir Dagan, or however you pronounce that, the head of Shin Bet, Yuval Dishkin, during a meeting with Prime Minister Olmert in the immediate aftermath of the war. Both men pointedly told Olmert the war was a national catastrophe and Israel suffered a critical blow. So we're about to see the same things kind of play out again, right? They're literally going to try to reprise the same tactics, techniques, and procedure, which is bomb Beirut International Airport. Again, we're going to get to that in a second. Bomb civilian infrastructure, quote, turn Beirut into Gaza. And we're going to look at an article later where one unnamed Israeli official has assured U.S. officials that they will, quote, fight a blitzkrieg. Not the best terminology, but like the entire premise of the Israel's military posture has always been they want to fight short, decisive, very violent wars that only last like 1 to 2 weeks, very short amount of time in other people's territory. Because Israel doesn't really have a lot of strategic depth, which means there's not a lot of standoff between the front lines in a conflict and their industrial centers. So short range and medium range rockets, if there's not a lot of standoff from the front line, can shoot and target en masse water desalination and transmission facilities, power stations, just about any relevant military base, which is why Cyprus has been getting involved in this, because the Israeli military knows that if they open up a front, all the air bases in the north and middle Israel will be destroyed, leveled. They'll have holes in their tarmac so they can't land and take off with fighter craft or, like heavier bombers. So they're trying to reorient to Cyprus, which we'll get into again. And because they're all vulnerable, literally everywhere in Israel, except for like the deep south, the south near, the Red Sea is vulnerable. That's why Intel, put the kibosh on that $15 million Intel contract. Intel on their $15 billion, facility that they're going to build in Israel, because sites in Israel are no longer secure. So you may be asking yourselves, why would the IDF and the military command echelon think this is a good idea? Don't they know what will happen? Yes, they know what will happen. And we're going to demonstrate that again. So again, I like referencing stuff. So this is a particularly good article. It's Fire and Blood. It's on the Calculus Tech website. It's an Israeli tech magazine, but they did a whole article about over 100 senior military and government officials participated in a report by Reichman University's Institute for Counterterrorism. And so Reichman University is one of their posh universities, in Israel. So it details how unprepared the Israeli home front is for an all-out war with Hezbollah. And this was before October 7th. I mean, they updated it to, I think it was in February. They updated the article, but the original one was written before October 7th. So we already know what's going to happen. Israel's war from the north, and I'm just quoting this for the next 30 seconds or so, will begin with a massive destructive barrage. The rocket fire will be intense, ranging from 25 to 3,000 launches a day. per day, including less accurate rockets. Periodically, Hezbollah will concentrate its efforts, launching towards single target areas like a base or a city, dense population centers. Because if Israel starts hitting dense population centers in Beirut, Hezbollah is going to respond, because Nasrallah has already said that we're going to fight without rules and stuff like that. So populations, they've been limiting themselves to military targets, mostly air defense artillery systems in northern Israel, and military intelligence equipment like radar blimps and stuff like that. So, okay, so on the early stages of the conflict, terror organizations, all Iranian proxies, in the Levant, like Iraqi militias, etc., will join Hezbollah, and they will shoot all their UAVs, their suicide drones. And there's been some talk about like 100,000 fighters will join the fight. Maybe a few thousand could show up, but mostly it's just going to be launches of rockets and suicide drones from the Levant. And so, beyond causing immense destruction to Israel, including thousands of casualties, precision guided munitions will attempt to physically strike and destroy Iron Dome batteries. So this is before they knew Hezbollah's full capabilities. Like, they've already taken out one Iron Dome battery. They tried to deny it, but it looks like it's pretty much confirmed that they took out one Iron Dome battery, potentially 3. So they said in this report, the rate of fire will challenge Israeli tech like never before. Stockpiles of Iron Dome interceptors and David Sling missiles will be depleted within a few days of the fighting, leaving Israel exposed to thousands of rockets and missiles without effective active defense. And this is before any of the ground fighting starts. This is how kind of insane all of this is, because, as you know, as you guys may have heard, like, Hezbollah has honeycombed their entire military infrastructure beneath southern Lebanon. Their tunnels are more sophisticated. They're modeled after Vietnam tunnels. They're more sophisticated, more reinforced and hardened than the Hamas tunnels. And the IDF has already been pretty ineffective at finding, fixing, and destroying those tunnels. And, some of those tunnels go into the Galilee. So if Israeli ground force, and they know this, if they advance into southern Lebanon, there will be Hezbollah infantry elements appearing in their backfield into the Galilee, unchallenged, until they come across behind the lines of Israeli forces. So that will be a whole nightmare. So it's just kind of insane. And so we kind of wanted to talk about, like, why, taking all of this into account, they would do this. So, because they know that all the infrastructure within Israel will be completely compromised. Again, that's why they wanted to start using British air bases in Cyprus, because, as you know, 4% of Cyprus is owned by the British. It's a relic of colonialism. Those are RAF air bases, Royal Air Force bases, that we suspect have been used to fly bombing sorties out of Cyprus into Yemen to target Houthis. And they'll need ports, because Haifa, as you saw in the 2006 documentary, Haifa got shut down. Ashdod will get shut down again. They'll need ports to have international shipping. That will all shut down. Everyone's everyone's Amazon packages will be not arriving on time. Electricity will not work. And then guess what? People are going to be trapped there, because guess what? If they hit Beirut International Airport, Ben Gurion International Airport's getting hit too. It's going to be a tit for tat thing. So a diplomatic solution would be the best option. So Hezbollah said what their red line is, and they said what their conditions for a ceasefire are. But then again, Israel said those are unacceptable, because Benjamin Netanyahu said today that they will only accept a partial ceasefire for the first phase of the hostage transfer in Gaza, which means Hezbollah's criteria will not be met, which means, and then Israel can't back down, because we're about to get into deterrence capacity and why they feel like they can't afford to. So you'd be like, okay, so if they are serious about actually fighting this campaign, knowing all the damage that they're going to sustain, I can show you what their answer has been. So you can pull up some CNN articles. This was reported by CNN before this past weekend. So, U.S. officials have not explicitly told Israel that they oppose any attack against Hezbollah, but they are warning them that their actions could lead to a greater war, which the two sides don't actually want, a U.S. official said. Israel has made the case that it can pull off a blitzkrieg. Not the best word to use, but the U.S. is warning them that they may not be able to ensure that it remains a limited campaign, the officials said. Okay, well, again, if you can't defeat Hamas in a blitzkrieg, how are you going to defeat Hezbollah in a blitzkrieg? Because Hezbollah is orders of magnitude above Hamas in terms of discipline, in terms of equipment, in terms of training, in terms of open supply lines. Because guess what? They don't have to operate in an open air concentration camp. Like, they have freedom of movement. They have freedom of training. They can get supplies in. They can get the fancy rockets in. They're just incredibly more dangerous. Plus, they also have more combat experience than Hamas had at the start of this of October, because they have like thousands of dudes, like tens of thousands of dudes that fought against the Islamic State in the Syrian civil war. So it's estimated they have over 70,000 fighters. That's a ton. And again, more sophisticated tunnel systems. So the fact that Israel thinks they can defeat them, and I don't think they expect to defeat them and dismantle Hezbollah, but I think they want to roll them up and force them north of the Litani River, because that was their objective during the 2006 Lebanon war. So I assume it's going to be their objective now. They're thinking that if they can push Hezbollah up to the Litani River, that they can no longer target their main industrial centers with their rockets. I mean, they can, but that still seems to be their objective. So it's not possible, especially in a blitzkrieg. What, you're going to defeat Hezbollah in like a couple weeks? Like, what? No, but that's kind of where the apparatus decision making is at right now. So the Israeli military and intelligence apparatus knows that an all-out fight against Hezbollah would be inestimably damaging. That's why they have tried to make moves to co-opt air bases in Cyprus. We've already mentioned this. And as you may recall, that Hezbollah found out about this, and Nasrallah warned the Cypriot government that they will be targeted if they assist in offensive operations. So if Israel goes in full force, let's say hypothetically in July, like mid-July, which is when it might happen, then Hezbollah will go in full force, and there goes the neighborhood. The Axis will get involved, which will have Iran in the background, also Russia. Also Russia is in Syria, and they are also allying behind the scenes with the Axis. If the West tries to help via Cyprus, or if Cyprus really is providing cover for Israel, Cyprus will be hit, which means that the UK will be dragged in. The UK owns 4% of the land in Cyprus as a relic of colonialism. It's where the bases are. As I've mentioned, also, although Cyprus is in the Middle East, it is in the Middle East. It's also part of the European Union, which will then drag those actors in. And so late last week, within hours of Nasrallah issuing the threat, however, that, Cyprus will become a legitimate target if they get involved, the Cypriot president, Nikos Christo. Oh, God. I lived in Athens for like 7 months. I still can't pronounce a lot of Greek last names. Nikos Christa guy. So sorry to all my Greek friends, sought to emphasize the island's policy of neutrality, underscoring the role it had played in establishing a sea corridor to transfer humanitarian aid to Gaza, which no longer exists. The aid ports shut down anyway. So if the Cypriot president, speaking on behalf of that government, is saying he's neutral, though, we can probably assume that the European Union has the same position as well. So everything still hangs in the balance, but it seems increasingly like the brakes are off. So once the Rafah operation is done, I see them actually attempting it with Hezbollah. So they're trying to draw it down to a lower operational intensity in Rafah and in Gaza to reorient and shift to the north, because their military is obviously stretched beyond its capacity. They can't fight a two-front war. Again, Israel likes to fight short wars in someone else's territory. First of all, their economy can't sustain a war of attrition, which we're seeing right now. They're only propped up by repeated U.S. spending and funding packages. A lot of that is stimulus and it's payroll for soldiers. It's not just bombs. So that's another reason why they can't do that. They like short wars. So this is going to be a whole thing. They can't fight two fronts. So they have to shut down Rafah first and then go north. And what's going to happen is they're already priming the narrative. They're going to say that Hamas's capabilities have been degraded to such an extent that they can no longer do an October 7th again. Hamas will still exist. They won't have achieved any of their military objectives, which were to defeat Hamas, completely destroy them, and recover through military means all the hostages. So what's going to happen is like an Iraq War George Bush moment. You guys remember? I forget which year it was in the Iraq War, but I think I was still in high school. He landed on the aircraft carrier and he got out of like the F-15 or whatever Top Gun crap that was, and there was this big mission accomplished banner across the command and control center of the above the flight deck. I don't know Navy terms, but it was a big mission accomplished banner above the aircraft carrier, and it's going to be the same kind of propaganda. It's like they didn't achieve anything. There's no exit strategy, but like they won, and then they're going to shift to the north because it's all about keeping their population in check and on board with what's going on. So, again, a lot of these actors, the United States included, doesn't want to get involved, but they're also not doing anything to stop it. So everything still hangs in the balance, but it seems, I think I already repeated the show notes. Still gotta learn how to play with this live ammunition. So I see them actually attempting it with Hezbollah. So in the next few weeks, common sense dictates that they shouldn't attack. And we can only hope that Israel will understand that. However, the evidence points that they will attempt it. Netanyahu has said that Rafah operations are winding down for a shift north. Yes, we got that. So there will be no permanent ceasefire. And again, to reiterate, Hezbollah won't stop targeting Israeli sites until there is a ceasefire in Gaza, and Hezbollah attacks and information operations are becoming increasingly damaging, especially after Hezbollah drone footage mapped out an entire target set above Haifa a few days ago. So they let a drone get past their air defense systems and map out an entire target set about like their most important port. It was incredibly embarrassing, and it was not a good PR moment. So the pressure is building. The Biden administration has greenlit an action simply by expressing its support, and we know red lines for the Biden administration don't exist. So because we saw what happened in 2006. They haven't updated any of their tactics. We already know what the opening moves of an Israeli offensive will be. They'll start by bombing Beirut airport. That'll be a big symbolic thing. And because we know how Israel primes the narrative, they just had an entire newspaper article or accusation saying that Hezbollah has weapons caches in the Beirut International Airport. The Lebanese government said that was absurd. It was a lie, but Israel's already priming the narrative for its own people because we know, remember Al-Shifa Hospital in November, where before they started attacking it, they did like 3 different assaults, but before the first assault, they had this massive propaganda campaign where they showed a CGI of all the tunnel systems in Al-Shifa Hospital. They're doing the same thing, and none of them existed, right? But they're doing the same thing with the Beirut airport. So I don't know if you remember this video from IDF's official channel, but yeah, this is Al-Shifa Hospital. We got all the tunnels here. Remember, we got all these terror tunnels. And you know what I like about this? Literally, there's no doorways to any of this. Like, look at this. There's a whole terror office, but like, how do they get in there? Like, honestly, do they teleport? Do they just like respawn inside to do terror things? I don't know. But anyways, so there was supposed to be this extensive tunnel system beneath Gaza, and literally none of it existed. It was all a lie. And they're priming the narrative to do the same thing with Beirut International Airport. So, yeah, it's all like, we know their tactics. They're not very sophisticated. The apparatus that supports them of Hezbollah is sophisticated, but the messaging itself is not. So my analysis is that the situation is that Israel wants to inflict so much brutality on the Lebanese civilian population so as to turn it against Hezbollah. That's the baseline of the Da'iya doctrine: pressure civilians so that they pressure the militants. so as to turn it against Hezbollah while relying on the Western-backed LAF, so Lebanese Armed Forces, to go to war with Hezbollah and reclaim the South. But of course, that's never going to happen. Therefore, they're using the Da'iya doctrine to ignite another Lebanese civil war that will destroy Lebanon and eliminate Hezbollah. And this is some 1970s nonsense that will not work. But this is the deterrence policy that they are banking on. They're also banking on another deterrence policy, one that shall not be named. I keep getting asked about the Samson option, but I thought I'd touch on it, not because I think it's ever going to happen, but I'm going to play this from a regional news station. So if you're just listening, it's in Arabic. I'm not going to. Well, I'll talk about it later.
حسمها سريعا، ولم تحدد القناة الجهات الإسرائيلية التي أرسلت الرسالة أو توقيت إرسالها ولا طبيعة الرد الأمريكي عليها.
According to the channel, the explicit Israeli threat to take military action in Lebanon in case Hezbollah doesn't retreat soon, according to the Israeli channel, Channel 12, is to use unprecedented weapons. And so since Israel has used literally everything, including white phosphorus, Willie P on civilians, people are like, oh my God, is it the Samson option? I don't know. They'd be insane to try it, but they are getting increasingly desperate. I think it's just too insane to contemplate. But again, they have to do something because they feel compelled to fight Hezbollah and defeat them quickly because, again, they can't sustain wars of attrition. So using big, scary weapons is pretty much all they got, right? So that's just one question I got asked. I don't think it's actually like a possibility, but Israeli likes to fight, these short wars in other countries. So, I think I'm just going to wrap up here and we're going to get to the Q&A. But one last section I wanted to touch on is, sorry, this hair right here is really pissing me off. Okay. Is that the U.S. Okay, this is from the U.S. Department of Defense. The Mediterranean Sea. Components of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean after an 8-month deployment in the U.S. Fifth Fleet Area of Operations on June 22nd, 2 days ago. So there's now a carrier or elements of a carrier strike group in the Eastern Mediterranean. People are like, are they going to be used to bomb Lebanese targets in the event of the outbreak of hostilities? And I don't think that's going to happen. First of all, what happened when Iran attacked or responded rather to the Israeli bombing of their consulate in Damascus, which was a direct attack on sovereignty? What did the United States, Britain, and France do? They had fighter craft run intercepts. So defensive intercepts. So the fighter craft flew out, shot down a missile, then shot down another missile. And so those, because in order to supplement the Iron Dome battery. So that's probably what it's going to start out as if this thing escalates. So they will run defensive intercepts, 100%. So I think that's one of the main reasons there. Now, will there be U.S. boots on the ground? Well, there wasn't in Yemen. And if you recall what happened during the whole drama in April with the Iranian reprisals and reestablishing deterrence after the Israeli attack, the U.S. said explicitly, we are not getting involved in a fight with Iran. So we're taking a back seat. We're going to run defensive intercepts, but that's it. I think the U.S. has demonstrated, despite my disgust with the Biden administration and their policy, the U.S. has shown that it wants this de-escalated. Iran wants this de-escalated. If you recall, even before April, I think it was in February, 3 U.S. service members were killed in an air base in Jordan when a suicide drone from a militia group in Iraq fired into the base. There was a whole drama where the U.S. and allies were saying, like, you can't attack a U.S. base and kill Americans and then, get away with it. You're going to be punished. And so they're like, hey, Iran, we're going to strike you. We're going to strike all the IRGC targets in the Levant. So you take that. And then they waited 5 days after publicly telegraphing everything. And they're like, okay, we're going to strike you. Oh, wait, we have to hold for weather because our missiles and our really fancy Lockheed Martin stuff is more effective when there's not clouds, which is, they still could have done it. So they waited another 2 days, and then they struck 85 targets. It was mostly empty warehouses because the Iranians had all this time to pull out all their proxies and all their IRGC elements out, so they didn't get hit and they didn't cause an escalation. So there is a precedent over the past 8 months for not wanting to escalate with Iran, despite what neocons like Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley, Namaste Namrata, are saying. So, that's kind of where it stands right now. The U.S. is definitely concerned about a wider regional war. The U.S. staying power is being challenged immensely by the flagging proxy war in Ukraine, and the entire United States political apparatus wants to do a complete strategic shift to East Asia in order to isolate China, and everyone's paying attention to a potential flashpoint in Taiwan. Nobody wants to get dragged into another forever war in the Middle East. So the entire apparatus is positioned to, again, shift to East Asia. So, but then again, like, the Biden administration has no red lines. They're not doing anything to stop any of this. So who knows, really? Now, I was gonna ask. The last thing I do want to talk about is, when could this happen? People are like, it could happen any day. Well, it takes a long time to plan these things, and of course, the operational planning got greenlit, but a massive offensive that's going to be really dangerous does take time. And so 50,000 reservists got activated. They have to be, some of them are going to have to be retrained. They're going to have to be outfitted. They're going to have to be assigned. They're going to have to do drills before whatever happens, depending on what their job is. And that takes time. So word on the street, word on the street over in Lebanon, mid-July. So that's kind of where things stand right now. And it's all insane. And again, just like what's happening in Ukraine, there is a diplomatic solution to literally all of this. But certain actors don't want that. Netanyahu, again, wants to keep this war going for his own political reasons. Everybody knows that. Far-right ministers whom he's beholden to, like Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, for his power base, have a messianic vision of a greater Israel, and they need Hamas to be destroyed. So they're going to keep pushing for war. And they've said explicitly they will blow up his government if he accepts a ceasefire. So he's kind of stringing them along. And this isn't going to end anytime soon. He said yesterday that he will only accept a partial ceasefire, which is basically, because of how delicate the negotiations are, by saying that he won't entertain anything is a direct sabotage of a ceasefire agreement in the world of diplomacy. So that's kind of stillborn at the moment, and this isn't going to change anytime soon. Israel has to, and here's where we talk about the deterrence capacity. Israel needs to restore its deterrence capacity. A fundamental part of its defense apparatus has always been the mystique of the IDF, it being inconquerable, omnipotent, the Mossad being omniscient, it sees everything. But the problem is, October 7th destroyed all that. It destroyed the myth. It was one of the greatest intelligence failures and military failures in recent history. And so in order to get back this idea that they're big, scary, no one ever wants to fight them, they have to defeat Hamas, which they can't. They have veteran IDF intelligence officers. The ex-deputy director of the Mossad included saying the war in Gaza is aimless, it can't defeat Hamas. And then they now have to defeat Hezbollah, which they can't. There's no way they can get their deterrence capacity back. But without that, they don't feel safe. So there's this fatalism going on where they're just kind of like, oh, well, we have to do it. We have to do it, even though it will be devastating. We'll have to do it. And the U.S. is not making that impossible. They're not saying, okay, well, you could do it, but you're not getting any more bombs to do it. So you better find a diplomatic solution. That's not going to happen. It's not going to come from the Biden administration. It is worth noting before we go into the Q&A in like a minute, Israel has a munitions shortage. There is a global supply chain shortage, in RDX and HMX, which are explosive compounds that go into like artillery shells, tank shells, all the bombs. So U.S. is short on bombs too. So and it's going to take time for them to get more bombs. That's why they're needing to push this operation to the right in terms of the timeline, because they need more munitions because they're out of it. That's why Netanyahu is being such a little B word about like not getting his weapons on time, because there's actually a legitimate shortage as well. It's not just a way of snubbing Biden and getting him not reelected. There's actually something behind it. So I think we're going to go into the comments and let me see if I can see comments. Okay. All right. Let's see what we got. Okay. What's your opinion on de-dollarization? Oh boy. Okay. Let's do a whole episode on BRICS and the Chinese Belt and Road and stuff. I think this is a little beyond the scope of this conversation. I live in Beirut. How worried should I be? Okay, so you know what the water cooler talk is better than I am. I'm talking to people in southern Lebanon as well, and what they're hearing is mid-July something could happen. It's going to start with a bombing campaign. It's probably not going to start with a ground invasion. So. Here's a good one. Why do IDF soldiers have military rankings, i.e. sergeant, at a young age? Hey, young man, woman, you're a sergeant. Okay, yeah. I've seen guys who are sergeants at 19. I was a private at 19. I wasn't a sergeant until I was like I don't think I was a sergeant until I was 22. One of my best friends, Travis, he's on my podcast, Colonial Outcasts, a lot. He was a field grade West Point artillery officer. He didn't make major until he was like mid-30s, I think. And they have like freaking 25-year-old majors. It's insane. They're just like too young for their like rank. I mean, they're too young for the job they're doing. They're too like immature. They don't have enough experience. And it's insane how young everybody is. Yeah, I've noticed that too. I don't know why they do it. It just seems like conscript army BS. So yeah. What do you think Trump's policy will be? Will he support an all-out war? Okay, S is asking this on Twitter. War directly with American soldiers. Trump didn't get involved in a lot of stuff he could have gotten involved in, especially with like Iran. So I'm hoping not. But I do think it's safe to say that he will support Israel as much as Biden does, but even more so. What we can hope for is that this conflict ends and there's a ceasefire, there's a diplomatic solution before November. So that's the best we can hope for. I don't think Trump's going to be any better. I don't see why. So, yeah, the collective West. So Ari on YouTube says the collective West and its arrogance and false power is losing it in more ways than one. Yeah. So the bombing the Houthis hasn't worked. The only way to do that, to kind of degrade their military capabilities, is to put boots on the ground. Nobody wants to get involved in mountain warfare and, in those mountains in Yemen, and nobody wants another forever war in the Gulf or the Middle East. So, yeah, and the United States Navy hasn't been able, with its Aegis systems and its air defense artillery systems, which are more advanced than the Iron Dome, hasn't been able to shoot down all the drones and stuff from the Houthis. So, yeah, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I think that's been proven. The staying power of the United States has been tested. But one of the ways we've lost in more ways than one is in soft power. The idea to inspire, to have people share our values, and thereby wanting to work with us diplomatically, economically, politically. Soft power has completely gone out the window because of all these, all the hypocrisy about the rule of law, democracy, human rights. It's all crap. I mean, a lot of people in the global South already knew it, but like people in America are starting to, and Europe are starting to wake up to that too. So, what else we got? Is there going to be a naval convoy of humanitarian aid to Gaza? Where the F's the Navy aid ships to break the Gaza blockade? What's your take on sending aid into Gaza? I mean, how are you going to get aid into Gaza? You can't land ships. The aid port's gone. The aid port was just a propaganda piece, guys. It wasn't actually like the last thing that was reported was the aid port is getting decommissioned. So who is the Israeli rep that met with Blinken today? Okay, so apparently Yoav Gallant and Amos Hochstein, the special envoy to Lebanon, met with Blinken. We're not going to really know about what they were talking about. Hopefully, they're talking about de-escalation, but who knows? They're not talking about de-escalation in Ukraine. So, U.S. foreign policy is always a monolith. So I don't know why they would do that. So. I think they probably talked about when the war is going to happen, what the U.S. will be willing to support and what it won't be willing to support, what the extent of U.S. involvement will be. And I think my money is still on doing defensive intercepts of Hezbollah rockets, but that's it. And you know what? The ability for the United States to do defensive intercepts on Israel from the Eastern Mediterranean is going to be a lot less effective because Hezbollah shoots and the rocket impacts pretty quickly. That's not enough time to launch a fighter from an aircraft carrier and have it intercept it. So it's going to be a completely different and less effective situation than it was when all those rockets were launched from Iran across the Levant, being tracked by satellites. So the capabilities of the United States and the Eisenhower, the Ike carrier strike group to intercept these rockets is going to be a lot less effective again than it was when the Iran shot into Israel. So, Lobster Man on YouTube, how did Israeli intel miss October 7th? Where do you think they dropped the ball? I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, personally, but I appreciate that some of y'all are. I think the October 7th stuff was just a combination of incompetence, arrogance, and thinking that they were human animals that could never break through the apartheid wall. So maybe there was like some like cigarette cancer man from the X-Files who knew about it, who just like didn't alert anybody. But no, I just think it was incompetence, hubris, arrogance. Yeah. Okay. Let me scroll to the U.S. might. Yes, the U.S. might help the Z-Boys track Zionist launch sites. Yeah. Well, you do know that we're already giving them targeting data in Gaza. So obviously we're going to do the same thing in Lebanon. Yeah, we're going to give them intelligence support. Yep. There's been a global hawk on standby in a holding pattern above the Gaza Strip since this thing started. Like, we're flying drones from Agadez Air Force Base in Niger before it shuts down in September in order to run intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance operations over Gaza in conjunction with the Israeli military. So we know everything that's going on. Despite what Matt Miller and those spokespeople for the State Department say. Like, we don't need to wait on Israel to do investigations. We already know. So, why does Ansar Allah, if you're not tracking, that's the Houthis, send missiles to blockade the Med? Yemen announced the Med blockade, but ships are still coming into Haifa. Does Yemen have the hypersonic rockets to blockade it? Honestly, I'm not a munitions expert, and I haven't been paying attention a lot to the Houthis over the past week. So, I do know that they have those suicide amphibious drones that are being effective. So, I mean, they're still blocking shipping. It's still hard to ensure a ship going through the Gulf of Aden right now. So what will Iran do? I don't think Iran could get dragged further into the conflict, but they don't need to. They don't need to do anything. Hezbollah and all the other proxies in the region could overwhelm Israel's air defense systems. So I don't know what they would have to do. Yes, check Columbia University trading on terror proves Israel knew. Conrad Jones, their mobile launch sites, no real point in tracking. Wilderness of mirrors intensifies. Yeah. All right. So, sorry guys, I think we're at the end of our time here. I thought the Q&A was fun. We'll do it more seamlessly and more refined next time. But I just want to thank you. I hope this live stream was interesting, helpful, informative. Again, if it kicks off, I don't think it's gonna happen this week. These invasions take a long time to organize. Again, Rafah has to be wound down. More arms and munitions have to be sent to Israel. They need more time to plan and to prep the reservists to go into southern Lebanon before this happens. So mid-July, which is the word on the street, apparently in South Lebanon, is a really great estimate. And hopefully, and again, there is still time to come to a diplomatic solution. So I hope everyone's freaking insane, because literally none of this is necessary. So great. This was the flagship pilot episode of State of Play at Mint Press News. And you guys are awesome. Thanks so much. And again, consider Patreon if you want to support monetarily independent watchdog journalism. So thank you so much. My name is Greg Stoker, and I hope to see you next time on State of Play at Mint Press News. Cheers, y'all. See you next time.